Welcome, everybody. This is influential Agile Leader Meetup, and I would like to welcome you today. An exciting conversation. First of all, I would like to talk about Meetup. This Meetup is about making your Agile practices successful by empowering you and helping you gain necessary support from your teams, from your peers, and your leadership level. We meet once a month and discuss ways to make things happen and also share our experience. And going forward, we'll have experienced Agile leaders come to speak and answer our questions every month. And during the conversation, please raise your hand or ask a follow-up question or type it in the chat. We'll answer questions as we go. So don't be shy, please interact with us. And today, I'd like to introduce our featured speaker and a successful, influential Agile leader, Tomo Lennox. Tomo is an Agile and Lean coach with over 20 years of experience, a featured speaker at conferences and popular Agile podcasts, such as Scrum Master Toolbox, which I personally like a lot. And Tomo has been writing papers and giving lectures on methods and speeding up delivery, improving quality, and reducing costs. He has drawn his experience from a lean software development, continuous integration, test-driven design, Scrum, XP, Kanban, and rapid prototyping. And Tomo has been hired by over 30 companies to help specify, design, develop, or test hardware and software, and to advise, coach, and manage projects. Tomo is an excellent, brilliant speaker, and I always get a lot from listening to his advice. It's a pleasure to have you here today, Tomo.
Thank you so much. To say I was hired by 30 companies meant at least 29 of them threw me out. So I don't know about that. Or maybe I left, but it's one of those two.
That's so humble of you to say that. Thank you. And I would like to ask my first question just to kick it off. But please, when we speak, please think about your questions and you feel free to jump in and ask. And so my first question, Tomo, with over 20 years of experience and helping over 30 companies, what are your favorite approaches and ways to make a sustainable change in teams and across teams, maybe on the level of organization?
Sure.
What would be that?
Sure. If you read the coaching books, it says you listen and you deal with the company, with each team's issues, and let them discover the problems, and don't try to push solutions. I've started to cross the line a little bit. I've got half a dozen techniques that have been so successful that after I listen a while, I almost always choose one of those to get the team to start on and kind of suggest that they go that way. And my very first one is, I really like every team to use a board. When a team uses a board, no matter what XP, Scrum, Kanban, almost anything, using a board really focuses a team on the work, lets them do some metrics. And so that is my favorite technique.
And how do you use it?
Mm-hmm. So now we get into the kind of the flow principles. So the first thing you do when you use the board, in my opinion, is you get some columns that match the work you do. Sometimes you've got some project management system and you have to go through here and mark this one from approved to unapproved to committed. On the Kanban boards, it's really the work you do as it goes across the columns. And then I get the team to do the walk the board. A lot of old teams are used to that old 3 questions, which they removed from the Scrum guide now. You go to a meeting, everybody talks just to themselves about their vacation and what they're going to do next month. And now the meeting's over. And like, where are we? What are we doing? No idea. When you walk the board instead of the people, the position of all the work is really, really clear, and people collaborate, and you start to really take advantage of Agile. So, first get a board, number 2, walk the board. And to make this more interactive, anybody have trouble with those, or anybody use any of those techniques before? Anybody have teams that Scrum teams in particular use lists instead of boards? Nobody wants to talk to me.
We use the boards, and I definitely noticed with a newer team that once the board was introduced and we started like walking the board or just having it visible for that stand up, it made it a lot more valuable. There's a lot more valuable like conversation around the progression that we were making on that sprint goal. And they really appreciated having that up front and center versus like what you were saying, Tomo, you kind of end up getting sidetracked with how's the weekend and how's your cat? How's your dog? And yeah, you lose
Everybody
sight of the
talks about
task at hand.
themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, and some of the work's not done, and some of it's finished. And do you know, or what do you have to do? What? Who knows?
And I also use boards, and I think the board keeps the transparency within the group where we is visualized and we can see exactly where we're at all times. So yeah, I think that helps a lot.
So the next thing I like to do is once I've got a board and people are walking the board, I can introduce the concept of whip. And whip is to me one of those things that produces results, right? There's so many techniques out there that are a little bit better than this other technique, but most teams I work with, people are juggling too much stuff and they get overloaded and they get inefficient. And as soon as you can introduce this concept of whip and say, no, you've already got something to work on. Don't pull something else. Yeah, but it's in the sprint backlog. That's okay. It'll sit there until you're ready for it. Just focus on this one thing and get it done. And then every day you talk about, what does it take to get this thing done? Who can help you get this thing done? Things get done. And once you get this process of get it done, get it done, get it done, you're on the right track.
Awesome. And in many cases, people figure out their flow and they put um, ready for development or refined, ready for development and development, code review, and they create all these columns. And sometimes it's quite a lot of columns there. And at the same time, people may think if you introduce a whip and you say don't pull another story. We have to focus on what is there on the board. They may say, but I don't have work. I need another story because I don't have work. And then you say, well, you work on whatever is on the board. And they say, well, I can't work on this because the another person work on this. So how do you go about this and how you convince people that they need to collaborate?
That's right. So the rule you gave is exactly the way you start it, right? Say, don't pull something new. Let's get something off the board. And they say, oh, I don't have the skill. Almost always, the first thing is the testers are backed up. Board is so backed up. I like to call it constipated, but I guess that's a little off color. And the testers are overloaded, and it's the developers who want to pull some more work. And I say, go help the testers. And they say, I am a developer. I don't, the likes of me doesn't do testing. And you say, well, now you do. And so not only does it make them more multifunctional, that's really important, but an incredible thing happens where developers, where developers who love to write code get set in front of a test console. They don't want to just push buttons. They make scripts and they put little automation things in, and suddenly your manual testing, turns semi-automated, and it improves the whole process. And the backlog in the your board goes away and things flow like success. Sometimes even a tester will do some development, but it's almost always developers doing testing, which break the backlog. And that is one of the most productive things you can get, because nobody does enough automated testing. And that's a good way to start it.
That's awesome. Awesome advice. Thank you. Anybody have any questions so far? Let me open my chat and see. Nope, nothing in the chat. So, Tomo, what if, just for kicks, somebody doesn't like your idea, and that person goes to manager and says, Tomo asked us to test, and I'm a developer, and could you do something about this? And the manager comes in and is like, wait a second. What did you say to people? You said developers to test? No. That's not going to happen.
It certainly has happened. That certainly has happened. So one of the reasons I've kind of gotten a little more into a rut in the techniques I use is that once you put those first couple techniques in, there's usually a much better flow the throughput increases, and if you're doing Scrum, velocity along with it, and the managers notice that, and so you immediately get some credibility with the managers because the throughput's increasing. The developers and team members in general um, usually like it too, so you get some credibility with them. And once you buy that credibility, now you've got a little bit, of trust that you can say, yep, that's the way modern people do it. And if that doesn't work, you say, well, that's the way Google does it. And they look at you like, well, I don't want to be different from Google. And so I usually get away with it. Usually, not always, usually.
Okay. And what if, sorry for being like a devil's advocate here. So what if you do send developers to help QA and everything is completed very quickly, and then there's empty, nothing on the board, but then QA start to sit around and think like, okay, what we're gonna do? We need to wait for developers to develop something. And for a couple of days, we just scratch our heads and thinking like, I don't know, maybe we should read a book.
Uh-huh. That's one of the problems with classical Scrum. I mean, I do mostly Scrum. I do mostly Scrumban these days. I love Kanban. Kanban doesn't have those walls in it, so you continuously work on stuff. I find that more natural. But one of the things I like to do when I'm doing Scrum is instead of trying to plan, like maybe you plan the most difficult thing first. That there's a lot of logic in that, or you plan the thing that most things are dependent on first. I actually try to plan one of the shortest things first, so that immediately something falls to test, really quickly, and then something gets done. I like to have a continuous progression of done, and that kind of breaks that backlog where the first 2/3 of the sprint is all developers and the last third of the sprint is all testers, and they don't quite get finished. I like to break it up to get flow going, even if it means unnaturally ordering the work.
It sounds like you need to pay close attention to continue developers to develop to feed enough for QA.
Uh, yeah, question.
Oh, no, sorry. It was not a question, but just to add one of the practice that that's a very fantastic problem statement, Latimer, right? When the developers and testers are doing paired programming, the quality and throughput is fantastic.
Absolutely. That's right.
But at the same time, there is also a velocity problem that needs to be addressed because the efficiency burns down your user stories pretty fast. Right, and that classic statement of classic problem of, okay, what will my QA do till the code is ready? So what we did, we actually did two initiatives. One, we developed a few coding standards, and then as a part of the paired programming process, we also cross-trained the QA along with the development team in reviewing those coding standards, as well as some of the low-level security procedures. And that also helped QA to get a understanding of how development works, and some of them become so cross-trained. So they became, sometimes successful developers, and also some successful automation testers.
Yeah.
Sorry, I took some time.
Yeah, that's so having anything that gets people to cross-train, I think is really a good idea, because it makes you so much more flexible. You can get out of things, and especially for the people who are stuck in the least skilled jobs, they're stuck there. And if you can get them out of there and engage their mind, that's a great thing. But let me just, clarify that the pair programming practice, even though it's kind of weird, even though it was the first Agile way back in XP, the teams that do pair programming, in my opinion, have higher throughput than other teams. That's a high performance technique. So, in fact, virtually every high performance team I've encountered, like them when you get them, is using some version of XP. So even though I work with mostly Scrum and Kanban, when you get those super teams, you pass them stuff and 2 days later they get it done. And there's this impossible job where you need this screen that's got to have a database. We've got to integrate it to this, and you hand it to this team and they say, here's prototype 1, here's prototype 2. What do you think about this one? Prototype 3 done. You think they're an XP team. So keep your eye on that XP. There's some really powerful things there. Most of my teams don't get there, but I've seen that work really, really well. The pair programming and the whole thing.
Well, I think probably we'll have to then say to the teams, if you need vacation and reduce your dependency, then you'll have to engage in pair programming.
Pair programming to get things to go flying, yeah. But it's like I said, it's a technique for a team that's got a lot of stuff going right for it. I think it's hard to start there. I think.
Yeah, so very interesting that there's a misconception that every developer needs to have their own task and their own story. So how do you overcome that? So
Yeah.
how do you talk to the team, and how do you make the change this, change their mind about this? Yeah.
So my coaching for reasonably mature teams is not to use tasks at all. I mean, they think they have to do a task. I say, you don't have to do a task. You can do the work. You don't have to do a task. And you use the task just when you get a messy one that's kind of confusing, and you break down a task to help you understand it. In general, you don't do tasks. In many teams, what that mucks up is all the hours around the tasks. And they say, but if we don't do tasks, we won't have any hours. I think, yes, that's right. Don't track those hours. Don't update those hours. Don't guess the hours. Don't add up the hours. Don't tell me how many hours each programmer is spending. Throw that all out. And productivity goes up. Like, so in general, one of my tricks is try not to get them to do tasks, or just occasionally, and if they do tasks, do not do estimates on tasks, and do not task at sprint planning. Task whenever it's useful to you. It's sprint planning, focus on getting those PBIs to flow.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I actually have my own anecdotes about this. In one big company, I always say, I used to work in one big company, so without a name, of course. And in this big company, there was a Scrum Master, or somebody who played a role as Scrum Master, and that Scrum Master insisted on updating task daily on how many hours left to do. Right. And then I asked him, why do we need to do this? Why do we need to update? And he said, because in version 1, the burn down doesn't burn down if you don't do this.
Right.
And I asked him, well, who needs this burn down? And he said, well, management is closely watching that. And they say, okay, let's stop for a sprint and see if anybody complains. And we stop, and nobody complained. Nobody's watching it. Nobody need to know how burned down.
That's right. That's right. And there's even I think you're absolutely right. And one of the important psychological effects is when you're using the burn down as your speedometer, on your team, and you're off, the Scrum Master comes around and he says, burn more hours, burn more hours. Like, no, don't burn more hours. That's the problem, not the solution. Get more things done. The get more things done speedometer is the burn up, right? So instead of putting the burn down speedometer in front of it that says, we estimated 427 hours and we're only at 204, let's work more. No, let's get things done. Let's get that thing to move. And if you're halfway through the sprint and it hasn't moved at all, that's why I like to put some things at the beginning and condition people, get things done, get things done, get things done. And if they perceive that chart is low and need to move it up, finish something, find something to finish. It'll move the chart up. The psychology change is really, really transformational.
What a great concept to have something to finish. Keep in mind, have something to finish every day, every sprint, every week. Yeah.
Right.
But the tracking time in some organizations, which I have, by the way, I'm Raj Kumar Subramanian. Sorry for the late introduction. I am a scaled agile coach, and I'm also I did my first Agile certification in 2010, and I am a SPC from by Scaled Agile. One of the there are two observations when it comes to tracking time. Burn up, I'm a big fan. That motivates me to deliver every day. But when there are relatively young resources, or young, sorry to use the term resources, young team members, Agile team members who join an Agile team, it takes they sometimes get confused on how do I do my sizing, how do I arrive, if it is a 3 or a 5 or an 8, to give them a hang of what a story point may be an equivalent of. Sometimes we allow them to track time, so they get a feedback over 2 to 3 iterations on what is their real one story point worth of deliverable can be done.
So I have a different solution to that. I don't like story points. They're they're a lot of work, and they're not that much value. So if you kind of look over to the no estimates camp, it isn't, the points in the story aren't value. They're not deliverable. They don't help the customer. They help you size the sprint. Well, you have to size the sprints. That's good. But is that the easiest way? And what I like to do is when I'm decomposing features into PBIs, I set the guideline. Is it something we can do in half a sprint or less? And if everybody nods their head, okay, it's a PBI. And if they say, oh, maybe, maybe it's bigger than that. And I say, okay, let's keep chopping until you all nod your heads. It's about, half a sprint or less. Once you get those pieces, kind of roughly uniform, plus or minus 200 or 300%, it all averages out. So no, I don't need any points at all. I can just count the PBIs. I can say, it's just like velocity, it's throughput, but it's just like velocity. You say, we do about 17 PBIs per sprint. So let's pull in 17 PBIs. And then in your sprint plan, you can look at those and say, anybody scared of any of these? Did we accidentally pick all big ones this time or something? Usually everybody nods their head and you do them. And you save a whole bunch of time estimating. And again, it wasn't any value anyway. All you've got to do is make sure you don't have your sprint overloaded. So don't do points at all. Don't do hours at all. Don't do points at all. Count PBIs.
Awesome.
Work to make them kind of relative and do them.
Great suggestion. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Very interesting. Anybody else want to jump in with any question or comment? Okay, well, moving on. My next question, Tomo, is how do you overcome some of the challenges you may find difficult to solve when making a change for a large program, when you need to go up?
Yeah, that is, that's a good question. As I've been coaching over the years, one of the things that I keep doing when I do my own kind of personal retrospective at the end of an engagement is I keep telling myself, you aim too low, right? You got to know all the team members, but you just barely got to know their boss. So, next time you think, okay, I'm working on the team and the managers. And then some director's got some whole waterfall idea and shoots you all down. And as I coach, I keep aiming higher and higher. So you do your engagement and you immediately set up a meeting with the vice president and kind of establish a peer-to-peer relationship high, and I said, what are your problems? How can I help you? What can I do with your teams? And then when you go down to the managers, they're like, oh, you talked to Tony? Yep. Tony says we need to work on this. Is that okay with you? Yeah. Well, if Tony says it. And then you go down to the teams. You do most of your work at the teams, but you've got that high level peer relationship and that gets it going. So my advice is aim kind of high. And I want to add one more piece to that in Japan, they have a language which is based on hierarchy. You actually use different verbs depending on whether this is your boss or your boss's boss, or or something like that. And you can't even have a conversation unless you know your rank. So they have these business cards, and they have this formal presentation where you present business cards when you first meet, and it allows you to talk. In America, we've got nothing like that. You are who you say you are. So if you're a self-made whatever, who started as a janitor and now you're a millionaire, you walk up to the company vice president and say, I've got a solution for you because I'm an expert. Well, nobody knows who you are. And so you can present yourself pretty high if they think you think you're a peer. Try it, see if it works, but it's worked for me.
So how do you present yourself when you talk to vice president?
I'm the consultant. I'm an expert in Lean and Agile systems. I've been doing this forever. I've read all the books. I've talked to your teams. We have a huge amount of productivity increase that we could unlock here. I'd like to do it for you. And they, oh, okay. Right. So when you've been in a company a long time, you've got titles and ranks and things, it makes it more difficult. But in general, if you present yourself as an expert with a magic solution, you can get up a ways and unlock things.
Yeah, that's a wonderful advice. Definitely, the power of networking, it can be overestimated, and especially when you present yourself, it's important their first understanding of what you do. Maybe not your title even. You could be maybe your title is a Scrum Master, but when you go talk to vice president, they will say like, "Hey, I Scrum Master. I work for Adam." No, that's not a good introduction. So much better introduction is actually to talk about what's your purpose in the organization. So talk about your purpose. That's a wonderful advice.
And kind of establish your value, right? You're not overhead, your value.
Exactly. And anybody have a question about this? Because it's very, very interesting topic that everyone can benefit from.
Yeah, that's worked for me.
That worked for me too. And sincerely, I connected not only with the vice president, I connected with the vice president, senior vice president, and then managing director and a president. So and it
Nice.
all works. It all works. You can go 5-6 levels up. Yeah.
Yeah, you gotta be gentle and careful. Lots of things, but every time I do it, I realize I've gone a little bit low, and I've rarely gone too high. I've almost never started with the president of the company, and then he says, "Who are you? Why are you talking to me? Get out of here." Never happens, because I just never am ambitious enough to aim way above my level. So it's much easier to aim too low.
Yeah, I've done something similar. I had to kind of push myself out of the comfort zone a little bit because I was always at the team level and I was always scared or nervous to go above. But especially moving to my new gig, I definitely started expanding more and just branching out and trying to meet and greet with people for that networking aspect, so they at least know who I am and what we're up to and all those things. It's been helpful.
So, Tomo, what will be the easy way? What you would recommend people, if especially if they join a new company, and let's say they're Agile Coach or Scrum Master, how would you go about connecting with people like Vice President? So, what's the easy way to do that?
Mm-hmm. Well, you have to be a little over self-confident, I suppose. I mean, my mother raised me with a superiority complex, and it's been devastating for my relationships. But in business, it's been really helpful that you can go to somebody with confidence and say, "I see the problem here, and we can fix it." You've got to have a little bit of that confidence, and then just go with it. You like I said, you are who you say you are. You just have to decide who you say you are.
Absolutely. There are two channels which I recently used. One of them, LinkedIn, is a powerful networking tool, and it's more easier to share our thoughts to CXO suite. And they do recognize that we work for them, and I mean, we also know that most of the CXO suite and directors, senior directors, vice presidents, they spend a reasonable amount of time on LinkedIn these days.
Mhm, mhm.
And the other opportunity that I have used and I've been, I have made it, I have made it as a point to use is the quarterly town hall sessions where there are always opportunities
Mm,
to share your thoughts,
mhm.
get your feedbacks. And then there is also an opportunity when some of the suggestions and thoughts and feedbacks that you share opens up room for a continuous relationship that goes way far than what we can think of. So those are the two channels which has helped me
Mhm.
to stay in constant touch with the
Mm.
leadership.
Yeah. And again, I want to say that I'm sure you could go too far and alienate all the people, at middle levels. I mean, I'm not saying politics don't exist. I'm just saying the right place to connect is probably a little ahead of little higher than where you think it is. Take small steps, but if wherever you think your peer level is, it's probably one level higher.
Hi, Tomo. Hi, this is
Hi.
Jerome. Hi. So do you always meet this vice president or C-level people with a problem and a solution?
It depends on what role
Mm.
I'm in. Um, and often I don't go to the C level. I mean, in some companies, C level is pretty high.
Mm.
When the C level is a couple levels above you, you can make some jumps. But I remember in the first company I worked for, I was 13 steps from the president of the company. It like that would probably not work well. So my advocation is not to go to the top, although it might work for you, but it's to go a little higher than you normally would to get a little more influence and a little better alignment.
Okay. All right. All right. Thank you.
So it's very interesting that we discuss this in terms of talking to your boss first, and then aiming higher and higher. And oftentimes the Scrum Masters who are not really networking or maybe didn't figure that out, many times they look at me and they say, Vlad, how can I go above my boss? It's not even possible. And I say, well, who is your boss? And they say, well, this is this person. I say, well, I talk to this person every day. Why can't you do this? And they say, oh, I'm not sure. My boss will not like it. So how you deal with what will be your advice for people who are in this position?
Yeah, so I go back to the right peer level, maybe a level above where you think, and if you think it's below your boss, it probably should go up at least one level to your boss, right? It should go up at least that high. But in general, I mean, there's politics everywhere, and there's people who have all kinds of bad ideas. But in general, all leaders need to deliver value, and they're in an uncomfortable place if they can't deliver value. So if you can give them something to deliver to their boss, that's a good thing. If you can increase their productivity, if you can get some big things done you can crow about, if you can be more agile in a company that's been pushing agile, whatever you can give them to deliver, then you're welcome. I mean, to that, they'll work with you.
Yeah. I would like to add, maybe it will be helpful for for different purposes. So many times in companies, there's an opportunity to connect to senior leadership, and here's how. Once a quarter, maybe once a year, there is a meeting called all hands or all company meeting or something like this, and then you would see a president or vice president or maybe managing director, somebody up high, would talk about the goals of organization or strategic alignment or something like that, or maybe report for a year. And typically during that meeting, there is a Q&A where everyone can actually ask a question. So this is a great time to actually ask a question and connect. And maybe if they allow, now in digital world, we can actually go online and ask a question like face to face, like one-on-one in front of everyone, and you will never get a rejection to that, because it's a direction from very top,
right,
to get that, to establish that connection.
As a variation on that, once somebody comes up to the all hands and makes a little pitch, to the invited guest, you have an opportunity to privately channel to them through your Slack, text, whatever you use, Teams channel, and ask them a direct question of what they just presented, and open the door to a conversation about something you need to get to them. So even if you don't ask in the meeting itself gives you a pretext to open that channel.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very important because there are opportunities and they're open to everybody, and we have to pay attention as agile leaders. I would like to empower everyone here, maybe so many people who will be watching this video, that you need to pay attention to opportunities like that, because it will give you potential to do more and maybe remove some of the barriers that you have for your teams. So it's pretty important. Okay, well, we already like 40 minutes in, so I would like to move to the next question. And Tomo, you probably had different approaches, and you as you become more experienced, maybe there were some times when you needed to sell your idea to executive management, whatever. And how do you go about selling your idea? Do you actually need to sell your ideas, these days, or you just give them the expectations and they just buy it and say, okay, well, you will improve the throughput twice by the end of the year. Okay, go ahead and do it. Like, how does it work for you today?
So I like to follow a law I learned from David Tran. I call it Tran's law. That says that a simple idea is a conversation, a bigger idea is an email, and a very big idea is a PowerPoint. That's my first guideline. So if you can just grab somebody and say, hey, I see this problem and I'd like to go fix it, and they nod you and say, okay, do it. Conversation works great. But when it's kind of complicated, you have to kind of lay out the parts. You lay out an email with 4 paragraphs, right, that describe it, right? That's your next level, but not 10 pages, 4 paragraphs, right? If you start to get to, oh, this email is getting long, now it's time to take it and put in a PowerPoint. And these days there's Miro and all kinds of ways people communicate, but I'm still sticking with Tran's law. First conversation, then email, then PowerPoint. That seems to be the way the business works. So there have been plenty of times when I say, I have the solution, you just forecast it. And they say, and he's like, okay, let me paint this out in steps. You know what your productivity is, you know what your team cost is. If you multiply this by this, you get this. Okay, let's try an example. Let's do a little illustration. And now I've got a 7-slide PowerPoint. That's what I pass them. It's got pictures, it's got animation, whatever I need to tell a story. I mean, and let me go back to tell a story. It's all about a story.
Tell a story. What is the best way to tell a story then? Where do you start from? What it needs to contain, and in order to have a successful presentation or buy-in, what are the components there?
Yeah, and I think there are people who study that and know a lot, and I don't have a formal framework I follow, but I do stick to, it's about a story. If there isn't a story to tell, you've probably done it wrong. It's kind of narrative with examples, and I think you were talking a little about about theory of constraints. And when he wrote the first book on theory of constraints, theory of constraints is really boring. It's a bunch of equations. He wrote a fiction book, The Goal. He literally wrote a fiction book. And as you follow the characters through there, like it's a story, but by the end, like you understand all the main concepts of theory of constraints. It was just brilliant. He told a story.
Yeah, it's becoming more and more popular these days to explain some management practices as a novel, and the 5 dysfunctions of a team, the Phoenix Project, and other things. So yeah.
A direct copy of the formula and the goal. And maybe if someone has got any research on this, it can contradict me. But my understanding is that pre-Renaissance, all of the texts were fiction. Principia Mathematica was fiction. It was a story. And then somewhere in the middle of the Renaissance, someone said, we don't need all that fiction. We can just write the equations down and explain things. And it flipped. But before then, everything was a story. And so the
That's very
goal was a
interesting.
return to a previous technique. But
That's
it's a
very
very
interesting.
powerful one.
Yeah. That's very interesting and exciting too. Yeah.
And in the
That's
same
great.
way, I heard that the cathedral builders, it used to be your entire reputation for being a cathedral builder was based on how many cathedrals you had built. and then these new mathematicians came by and they said, this is the shape of the arc. This is the way the buttresses work. This is how the physics is loaded. If you understand the science, I can build you a cathedral of any size. And then in the next 20, 30 years, the experienced people's cathedrals are still there, and the kids with the math, their cathedrals fell down. It's like, oh, well, maybe the math by itself isn't enough. Maybe there's something about experience which is worth something. I think we still
Yeah.
struggle with that today, whether it's theory or practice that gets you there. The practice people
Yeah.
have a lot going for them.
So to be convincing, you kind of need to show your experience, and you need to okay.
And
That
let me
makes
just
sense.
layer on top of that one concept that maybe it's because you have some stories to tell.
Yeah. So if you don't have experience, what would you do?
Yeah. So
Tell us. Yeah.
tell somebody else's story is what I would
Tell
say.
somebody
But
else's story.
yeah,
Yeah.
but if you just come in with theory doesn't go over very well even today. But
Yeah,
stories.
yeah. The second part of the conversation where Vladimir ended up with, what if they don't have a story?
Mm. Mm-hmm. I mean, you can just present some facts, and maybe they'll go for it.
Yeah. Well, we use the portfolio Kanban.
Mm-hmm. Love Kanban.
Yeah, portfolio Kanban, and so safe as I mean, we know the competencies and dimensions of safe, scaled agile, where LPM is one of the most important body, and in which we have the portfolio Kanban. The portfolio Kanban is a funnel through which such thoughts, such epics gets created, and then you have to create a lean business case, and then
Yeah.
test the hypothesis, do a MVP, and then it feeds the agile release train from there on.
Mm-hmm.
Just try it. I mean, like when that question came, like, what if I don't have a story? And I was like, okay, how do we do it when we don't have a story?
I mean, ideally, there's some facts you could substitute for
Absolutely.
story, but in my experience, the story works better. But maybe you just do it on facts. Let me just sidetrack into a story. teams, I teach them to do experiments. Everybody wants best practices. Well, who knows what the best practice is? I teach people do experiments. So here's a story. I worked with a team. They were a good team, but they were not innovative. They've been trained for years to do what they were told. And I was telling them, no, think of the ideas and do them yourself. And they nodded their heads, okay, we'll do that. But nobody proposed anything. And so I said, you've got to try some experiments. And then finally, somebody in the test team decided we were having too many stand-ups. And without even discussing it, she just canceled 2 of the stand-ups a week. And so they just had Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And then they did it by email on Tuesday, Thursday. And I thought, this is probably not a very good idea. So what did I do? I gave her an award for an innovative idea. And I made it really pretty public. And it was a physical award. It was back in those days we could do that. And then over the next couple of weeks, the communication kind of went down. And they decided maybe we actually need to stand up every day. And so they put him back in again. I gave her a second award for feedback and innovation. And after everybody else watched her get 2 awards, one for doing something stupid and one for correcting it, like suddenly everybody had this little idea they wanted to try. Like, I did it, I got over the hump, right? That did it. So the moral of the story is, do experiments, but by telling in a story, you'll remember that. And maybe they'll try it, and it kind of gives you the implications, reward any movement in the right direction, kind of Skinnerian conditioning or something. But it took the story to do it. I'm not sure how I do that without the story. Right? Say, teach experiments. It's important. It took the story to make it interesting and memorable.
That's awesome. Yeah, definitely. A story, a good story, especially if you have a good story in the back pocket to tell, and that got a lot. That helps a lot of buy-in. So, I am sure all of us have stories. We just need to dig it out, think about it, and also we can collect it. You can actually say Tomo's stories on your next retrospective.
That's right.
Easily.
And it would be wise to collect stories, your own and others you steal, and literally build a list of stories.
Yeah. I remember I was talking to a team about something. I don't remember what, but maybe we were talking about how to split the stories or something like that. And I was talking to them about Bill Gates. And that was not my story. That was Joe Justice's story, and he was telling about that. Bill Gates asked about how can we do things in parallel? How can we parallelize things, right? So, and maybe it's hard to explain it in theory and say, well, in theory we need to do this and that. But when you talk about Bill Gates coming into the room and saying, how can we do things in parallel? All of a sudden people start to think about it, and that helps a buy-in. Yeah.
That's right. Build your catalog of stories you can pull out. And I also have one for jokes too, by the way, that it's not quite as big, but I keep like half a dozen jokes. So for any time where, that would be more appropriate, I tell the joke instead of the story from my fairly small list of, good technical jokes.
Oh, there are technical jokes?
Well, I mean, they apply. Like, okay, so I'm going to tell a quick joke. There is this kid, and he was going to school, and he's running next to his bicycle as fast as he can. So the policeman drives up and he says, "Oh, did you have a flat tire?" And the kid says, "No," runs by him. And the policeman goes, "That's weird." So he pulls up next to him again in his squad car. And he says, "Chain fell off?" Kid says, "No," and he goes running by again. And so the policeman pulls up one more time. He says, "So why aren't you riding your bike?" And he says, "I am so late for school, I don't have time to get on it." Right? So, okay, so that's one in my catalog. And there's like plenty of situations where,
Oh,
you
that's
know,
so suggestive. That's so suggestive. Tomo.
right? The team just didn't do the thing that was so obvious. Well, why didn't you
Uh,
automate the testing? Well, we didn't have time. Well, why didn't you do a
yeah.
retrospective? We don't have time for retrospectives. Like there's dozens of things where, you know, that joke just fits right in. And you only need
Awesome.
like less than a
Awesome.
dozen jokes and it covers almost everything.
That's great. Yeah, we should listen more of a. We should have a joke session when we share our jokes. It's
Joke
great.
session, that's right. Have a central joke repository. There must be plenty of jokes which, you know, which have no value whatsoever. A man walked into a bar. Like, wow, funny joke, but it has no meaning. But collecting jokes that are useful.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of like the illustration of many problems actually. One of them is like a technical problem as well. So yeah, so or not changing the way people work because they don't have time to change it. Yeah, so kind of like we are busy pushing the cart in the square wheels. We don't have time to change the wheels to round wheels. So yeah.
Mhm.
Same thing about innovation. So many people actually slaughter innovation and they just say, we innovate in an innovation sprint. Maybe our innovation sprint, and I have nothing
Yep,
against
sprint.
safe. Yeah, I have nothing against safe with innovation sprint, but some of these companies saying we have innovation sprint once a year. So they innovate once a year, and that's so sad. And on one retrospective in one big company, I was asking, okay, how it was a question like on the retrospective, silent retrospective, when everybody put cards, and I was asking a question: how often do we need to have an innovation sprint? And some people said once a year, once a quarter, and then when we discussed that, I say, you know, what Elon Musk is saying, innovation sprint is every sprint, and everybody's like, every sprint, innovation sprint, really?
Yeah,
Why
he
not?
means it.
Why not?
Yeah.
If you want to move faster, yeah. Every sprint. Okay, awesome. So we kind of wrapping it up, and in the end, I want to actually, it's a good segue to the last question. So, maybe you heard of some of the worst advice about agile you've ever heard, which repeated often, or maybe some of the conventional wisdom that agile about agile that you disagree with, something like you see all the time, but this is not really working. What do you think?
And you know, in general, I have a long litany of things that people assume they know about agile that they really don't. People take the artifacts of agile or the ceremonies of agile and they say, well, we have a sprint, you know, stand up every day, so we're doing scrum. And like, you know, is that all it says in the scrum guide? Or, oh, we're calculating velocity, that's scrum. And really, for me, almost all my complaints are about not understanding the principles of agile and assuming that those window dressings in the top are the thing that make it agile. You know, so agile is really the agile mindset, the agile principles, some grasp of, you know, a dozen different principles that make you agile. And I'm constantly raging against people who oversimplify it and cling to the artifacts, not the principles.
So could you mention some of the examples of that?
So for instance, you know, people cling to their points and their velocity. And so I ask them, how does the sprint guide define velocity? And they tell me, oh, points per sprint. Velocity isn't in the sprint guide. Neither are points. And they say, oh, yes, it is. And they go looking for like, no, it isn't. You know, that was from XP. You're doing XP? Oh no, we're doing Scrum. Are you? Do you have a sprint goal? It's mentioned 17 times in the sprint guide. They say, no. Well, how about this? And then you realize that they don't actually know how Scrum works at all.
Yeah. Many people are confused about confusing Scrum with some of the other practices.
Right.
And maybe the reason for that is that when you go to the Scrum training, a part of the training, the trainers actually teach you stories. They teach you story points and velocity and planning. How do you plan the project in agile way and stuff?
Things
And
stolen from all kinds of places.
And because of this, it get mixed up. And when you get the certificate of a Scrum Master, you think you attribute that all of this knowledge is actually attributed to Scrum. So that's really true. That's really true. Yeah.
But it doesn't tell you, limit your work in progress, because that's key to efficiency. Have a multifunctional team, right? Those are the important things underneath it. Those are the things that the beginners don't know that really make them agile.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tomo. It was a great conversation, and we're at the top of the hour. And I would like to ask if anybody else have any questions or comments. Please, it's a good time. Tomo, how many more minutes do you have?
Yeah, if you want to take, I could take another 15, 20 minutes if you want. Be glad to. If anybody has questions, or if you're hungry for dinner, that's fine too.
So not as a question, but from a learning perspective, I'm recently hearing few terms like dojo coaching, shorter sprints. So would like to hear some experiences, if any, in that space.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, because like when I started in 2008 in Agile world, we had very basic ceremonies, right? And now in the scaled Agile, we do PI planning, iteration planning, inspect and adapt session. And so now we are looking curiously at what is this what do you call, like the dojo planning? Is it another version of Agile or another flavor?
No, it was it was made popular here by the people at Target.
Gotcha.
What is that woman's name? I can't think of who used to run their center there. I talked to her for a long time. And it's a way of training,
Is it Jess Brock?
not a framework. Is it what?
Is it from Jess Brock?
Didn't hear that.
The name of the person that you were referring to, was it Jess Brock?
I've heard that name, but that's not the woman I remember talking to.
Gotcha.
And I was lucky enough to we chose the same restaurant one night, so I just casually bumped into her and got a really good conversation. But it's a way of training, and it's a way of kind of yanking people out of their waterfall mindsets to get them into agile. And to my mind, that short sprint is, gets them into the idea that you can do things in pretty short periods of time. When you've been waterfall trained, you think about months, and here's an 8-year plan, and we're going to do this phase, and we'll get it done in just 16 months. I'll be great. And so when you put them into agile, where you talk about to get it done in 2 weeks, how can we possibly get any work done in 2 weeks? And then you bring them to this class where you've got 2-day sprints or something. It moves them. It gets them out of there. And to my mind, that is the great value of it. People love that, and everybody who's been through those told me how much they love it. I don't know if they're still doing it though. Well,
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
I don't know, but people who went through it loved it.
Yeah. I think there is a consortium of agile dojos, or at least was a consortium, and one of the people there, and it was like a video, and one of the people who were there currently working in US bank as a agile top agile executive, Stacy Peterson. I don't know if you.
Yeah.
That's her. Okay.
No, it was a different person I took, but I remember I met Stacy.
Yeah. So Stacy was at that consortium presenting, the Agile Dojo idea.
Yeah. It's they're interesting. I've got nothing bad to say about them, and like I said, but to my mind, the special strength is just to kind of yank people out of that waterfall and get them into a new way of thinking. But then you've got to go back to more normal frameworks. Although, having said this, we just went to that Joe Justice lecture a little while ago. If any of you hit that one, and
You call it lecture.
lecture. Well, whatever that thing Joe Justice does, but he said at Tesla, they really do those fast sprints. I mean, they really do them daily. So maybe there's something there after all.
Yeah. So yeah, and talking about that Joe actually has a very interesting definition of a sprint. He's saying that sprint is something when you deliver something to production, something valuable that improves something that has impact. And he said that the first SpaceX sprint was 2 years. So the sprint is 2 years. Okay, so that means they couldn't deliver anything until after 2 years. But now they're on a week sprints or something like that. Every week they deliver something.
Well, I heard of some daily sprints that some of the people were doing too.
Well, that's a Tesla.
Tesla, I'm sorry, Tesla,
yeah. So Tesla doing 3-hour sprints with this what is that? Daily Scrum every 45 minutes.
Yeah. It's I also hear people get burned out there pretty fast, but
it's mind blowing. It's mind blowing.
Yeah, I mean, and go back to the dojo concept. For all of us who measure our sprints in weeks, if we spent a week doing 3-hour sprints, would it make us better? Maybe. I haven't tried it.
Well, the point is you have to know how to deliver in the hours something valuable.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
When I went to the last time he was in the Twin Cities, I got to go to his presentation. I actually got to have dinner with him. It was really, really cool. He was talking about wiki speed, where he's making cars, and they have to make door panels for their cars, of course. The traditional Detroit way is you have this $1 million stamping press that goes bang and makes a door, and then you better make a lot of those doors because you invested $1 million in that machine, and he couldn't do that because he couldn't make the machine in a sprint. So he could only use 2 exotic techniques that worked in one sprint. He completely inverted the whole process of economies of scale by limiting everything to the things he could do in one sprint. And he got some really amazing, almost impossible things out of that. So the theory is interesting.
Yeah. And Joe, as usual, is full of stories.
Full of stories. So. That's right. He is more than anything else a storyteller.
Storyteller. Yeah, that's right. So that your advice about stories is very, very powerful. Thank you, Tomo.
He's
I
got
appreciate
some great
that.
Ones.
Any other questions? Any interesting, I don't know, comments, topics? You can ask Tomo anything for another 10 minutes.
That's right. And otherwise, just write to me, tomo@tomolennox.com.
I just have one small, this is for Vladimir, but I can keep that question towards the end of the conversation. This is about, we are actually connected on LinkedIn, and there is I was about to ask if you can give me any reference for a job opportunity with Pearson in Des Moines.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Let's connect on LinkedIn. Just shoot me a message, so that will be great.
Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And by the way, don't forget, send the same questions to Tomo. Maybe Tomo can refer you to someone, because our networks may be a little bit different, and in the agile world, we kind of need to connect with each other, not know each other, and sometimes economy goes down, and so many people, shuffled, and the companies cut into muscle and lay off good people. And sometimes you have a bad manager, and you cannot do much with the manager like that. You have to leave. We all go through that, and we need to support each other. And there are some other companies that are growing rapidly, and they say, "Where are my Scrum Masters? We need 3 more. Find them tomorrow." So that we need to stay in touch and help each other with that.
This is a really hard time for companies to hire people. So if you can make a connection through a network, there are some amazing opportunities.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead. I remember recently was a big rush in Wells Fargo. Something happened in Wells Fargo, and they hired like hundreds of Scrum Agile people. Well, it's a big company. Maybe it was like a management direction. But that was last year, I believe. Or yeah, that was last year. So I don't know if it finished or not. But I would look at Wells Fargo if they still they're residually looking for people. And now it's a new year, so everybody have a new budget. Oh, we talked about this, Tomo, just before the meetup started. How everything turns into pumpkin at the new year. So now everybody's so excited because there's a new budget. So good time to apply for a new job. Yeah.
Yeah. December is a harder time.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, everybody. I appreciate Tomo. Pleasure. Always pleasure to talk to you.
It was fun. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah.
I was honored.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank
Well.
you.
Yeah, thanks, Tomo. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Great to be with you.
Yes.
Thank you. And it's a pleasure to meet everyone. Thank you so much. Appreciate all the questions, loud all questions and answers. Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Same here. All right. I will follow up with you. I'll post the link to the video later in Meetup. And please join us next month. I will post about this, and we'll do the same. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Have a good
All
night.
right. Bye-bye.